Welcome back to CareCast, the podcast from Caresoft, the trusted government IT solutions provider. Subscribe to get the latest technology updates in the public sector. I'm Anthony Jimenez, your host from the Caresoft production team. On behalf of Spectro Cloud and T2nd, we would like to welcome you to today's podcast, focused around exploring how Spectro Cloud secures tactical edge operations with modular open systems architectures. Build resilient software for environments at the edge. Mark Perry, Director of Public Sector Growth, and Dr. Raj Iyer, President, will discuss securing the tactical edge.
So, all right, everybody, thanks for joining us. I'm Raj Iyer, president of T2nd, Bay Area-based startup company. We're a deep tech defense company focused on bringing edge AI infrastructure solutions to the tactical edge. I've had the pleasure of being in the company for well over a year now, but also had the distinct pleasure of being the Army's first CIO of the Pentagon for 3 years, where I led the Army's digital transformation strategy. And so much of what we're going to talk about today is what's changed in the last 5 years since the Army's digital transformation strategy. How has industry moved? How has technology moved? And how is industry reacting, to what we're seeing in terms of the geopolitical situation and threat environments? Mark?
Yeah, appreciate that, Dr. Iyer. Yeah, and I don't know, I'm kind of, fanning out over here. Like, I'm really excited about this discussion today. So, Mark Perry, I'm with Spectro Cloud. I lead our growth for the public sector and been dealing with tactical edge for quite a while. And it's been a kind of a hot topic. And I think now, somebody at Modern Day Marine said the other day, I've heard the word hands and modern warfighter a lot and he's right? How are we getting things into the hands of our warfighters now? How are we making sure that it's available? How do we make sure it's open? How can we make sure it could be done in all of these regions that you said, and then geopolitically to, hey, this could be the next, I guess you could say hot button, right? Mm-hmm. So how do we build all that out? So thanks again for joining today.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Really looking forward to it. So, I mean, I think we kind of already did get into it, but I will say that, again, fanning out here, what you've kind of built at T2nd and kind of where, in my mind, the tactical edge is going. And I think we used to refer to it, I talk about all the time, as like that hub and spoke. Mm-hmm. That old hub and spoke, I call them like micro clouds now, that are going to have to be out there in these, austere environments that, hey, they might have to take on a big workload to mm-hmm. be able to ingest stuff and do it real time. I mean, we used to talk about it all the time. I was an infantry guy, so I was never cyber or anything like that, but speed to us was essential.
Yeah.
And I think it's even more, prevalent now, I guess you could say.
Yeah, Mark, that's a great point. And, I think the definition of the edge and the complexity of the edge is rapidly changing and evolving. And that's because of the evolving threats that we see on the battlefield. And so it used to be that, again, when you look at the GWAT era, the last 20 years of what we've been doing, it was really about, okay, if we had a really great command post that was survivable, and you could, essentially centralize your command and control, to that AOR, and you had the resiliency when it came to communication. And then you had the logistics to go with it. You had, your fires to go with it. You did a pretty good job, right? And these were the days when the Army was fighting at the brigade combat team level, right? That was a unit of action. And it was, we had a force that was lethal, and we saw the results. We saw how well the DoD did in the Middle East. And then when we, as we moved into the era of the invasion of Ukraine, and we saw how the contested environment was really, putting pressure at the edge. So much of that architecture, that edge architecture, for not only how we fought, but the infrastructure and the IT and the support that's needed to actually survive in that new world completely changed. And I think it was a great awakening moment for the Department of Defense and our Department of War, But I was fortunate enough to be at the right place at the right time when we saw the threat environment change, and we were building out the Army's first ever digital transformation strategy at that point. And we knew that what we had to build was for the future, where, and even then when we were looking at, pure competitors like China, we knew that, we were always going to be contested in the spectrum. We knew we were always going to have to plan for resiliency at every level of the operational fight. And to do that, having centralized command posts was no longer something that was viable. It had to move to an architecture and a warfighting doctrine where command and control was distributed, where every unit at every echelon had to survive and be lethal, being completely disconnected, right? And to achieve that architecture meant that you had to completely reimagine every aspect and every piece of how you were putting together your support for a particular unit, at every echelon. And then you add to the fact that the Army decided, for all the right reasons, that the unit of action now was at the division level, meant that you no longer restricted to really what we call the tactical boundary. It's now the integration between all the way from the edge to the enterprise and back, right? So that seamless connection all the way from the tactical edge to the strategic meant that we had to completely rethink everything. And we also had to rethink everything from the perspective of not just communications and networks, but in terms of data, right? Which is what we're going to spend a lot of time talking about. So for the last 20 years, I would say, the Department of Defense has been laser focused on everything that's net centricity. How do we protect networks? How do we get resilient networks? To now, the shift being, how do we get to being data centric? How do we make our decisions with data, with limited data, with unclean data, and with large volumes of data at the edge, when the network is no longer as assured, when power is no longer assured? And so that is now the reality of the new tactical edge. Is you got to be on the move, you got to make decisions on the move, you got to be resilient in terms of taking as much data as you need with you on the go, and to be able to survive and be lethal in that environment. And so this is a foundational shift in terms of that threat environment. And we see some tremendous work being done by all of the services in terms of adjusting and moving to this new mode. And it's, for us at T-Second, it's been not that this was a coincidence, because when the company was founded, it was all based on the fact that we're going to see over the next decade a move towards more decision making at the edge, right? The edge is no longer just a data collection platform. The edge is now where decisions are made.
Yes.
And that, by the way, and that's just not in the defense sector, right? That is, we're seeing that happening in oil and gas,
Yep.
in mining, in telecom, you name it. I mean, every industry today is seeing more and more data being collected at the edge, where in fact Gartner has put out the study that said between now and I think 2029 or 2030, 70% of the data that's generated is going to be at the edge, right?
Yeah.
So, which meant that everything that we've built in the past in terms of software as a service systems, data platforms, and everything that was all, supporting an enterprise corporate level headquarters decision making, all that now has to translate into a capability that is decentralized at the edge. And it's truly an exciting time, and it's really exciting for us to be at T-Second with the right products at the right time.
Yeah, I mean, I could literally turn this, and I think we talked about this before, I could turn this into an easy 5-hour conversation, because, and again, that's why I love speaking with you today. You nail on so many aspects that are talked about and not talked about on a daily basis, right? And one of the things, listening to you speak through it and the things you've had to, transform over the last, 5 years, a word comes into play is complexity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think what a lot of people lose, or maybe they might not understand, is even from regulated industries and the way that they work today compared to 10 years ago is a lot different. And that regulated piece of it is more important than ever. So this is leading to kind of that question. And when we talk about it, there's a lot of underlying things that have to happen. Like for us at Spectro Cloud, right? Everybody's like, I speak to it as a unified platform because that's really what it is. But underlying, we're talking about, Kubernetes and containers and, the difficulty of standing up environments like that. It's hard. We make it easy, right? So I'm being very profound when I say that. I think that's our actionable as civilians and as proponents of, the branches and regulated industries, making it as easy as possible to take these environments that are normally, like you said, in large data centers, huge data sets are supporting it. I mean, I remember working healthcare, 10, 11 years ago, and there was a company that had 3 petabytes of data, even back then. And then I couldn't fathom it at the time. And I'm like, now trying to take stuff to the edge and going, okay, I want to do this surveillance or command and control or all this kind of stuff. And I need to process it now. Because that's where we're at. And the reality is we can. But here we go. Now for us on the software side, we're like, okay, we need to be able to support that and make it as easy as possible.
That's right. So there's two points I want to hit across, right? One is obviously the data density challenge. So depending upon, whether, you're depending on what level of echelon you're in, let's say, at a battalion level or below, with the amount of sensors on the battlefield today, right? Literally, I think in a couple of weeks, you could be up to about 200 terabytes of storage that's needed. Now, what's happened is, and this is between all the way from, EW sensors, cyber sensors, SIGINT, ELINT, OSINT, GeoINT, all the multi-INT sensors. And by the way, not just our own sensors, but, sensors coming from our allies and partners, right? Because, those are out there too in the joint battlefield. And so all of that is leading to a tremendous amount of data. And it was surprising, when we looked at it, first, of course, in, the Department of Defense then, we complained about not having enough data, right? This was just over 5 years ago. Wasn't enough data, couldn't access it, and wasn't enough for decision making. And in 5 years, we'll come to a point where everybody's screaming we got too much data, right? Which means that this is now putting a humongous burden, in terms of, cognitive overload on the warfighter, right? So it's very clear that if we don't bring AI into this, if we don't bring processing to the edge, right, much of this data is just going to be unused. And we're seeing that already. So much, so for us at T-Second, we participate in a lot of joint experimentation efforts, in the Department of War, in the Army, and other places. And one of the first things we do is we go through and we try to understand data flows. And what is your data architecture looking like today? Obviously, you're experimenting with a lot of new sensors, lots of new technologies, UAS, counter UAS, all that great stuff. But then, when we look at the data architecture, it invariably goes back to something that was pre, all of these new technologies, right? Which meant that they assumed that there was never going to be enough storage available to work with all this data. And so a lot of the pre-processing happened on sensors. A lot of things happened where, what you were only looking at was the final product and you were not ever getting the raw data. And that's because there was always this challenge with not having enough storage at the edge. And that works okay to some extent, right? The problem is two things. One is, in order to establish a real common operating picture at the edge, you're going to need, multi-INT sensor fusion, right? And integration, which means, it's great that you're getting one operational picture coming in from your EW sensors, another one from your radars, another one from, all these other sources. But what our commander is asking for is that complete true operational picture, right? What does that look like when you bring all these things together? That becomes a challenge when you're just looking at finished products, right? When it comes to intelligence. So that's one challenge. The second challenge is when it comes to running AI models at the edge. oftentimes these have been trained obviously with a set of data, back in a data center or the cloud, which is great. And now you are running these models at the edge. But with AI, with these models, we know, if you heard the word, um, 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 what happens with models is that, they drift, right?
Yep.
So you've trained it on a set of data, but your data can change over a period of time, and your models will have to be updated over a period of time as well. So what happens is, if you train your models with a bunch of data and you throw the data away, okay, your model is as good as the data was trained on. What you need in order to avoid drift is you want to be able to continuously train those models with new data as they're coming in, which means that you now have a need to not just keep the historical data, but also to bring in new data as they're getting generated every single day, and to constantly, readjust your models, right? So it's not something where you train something, you throw the data away. We've now come to a point where we realize you can't throw the data away. It doesn't make any sense to throw the data away. So these are all big cultural shifts, foundational shifts in terms of the data architecture, that we're seeing a lot of people just starting to, scratch their heads and go, "Oh, I never thought about that," right? And the reason why they haven't thought about it is because they always assumed, I'm never going to have enough storage at the edge to keep as much data there. I'm never going to have compute power at the edge to process it. So I'm going to have to move it to the cloud. If I'm going to have to move it to the cloud, I can't take all my data to the cloud. I'm only going to have to take some subset of the data, back to the cloud, because I will never have the bandwidth needed. So these were all workarounds that have now just become, just way of doing things today. And really now's the time to challenge that, right? Challenge those assumptions. Is that, okay, yeah, that's how you did it. But those were under some constraints and, limb fact that we thought, you couldn't overcome. But that's not the case anymore. And I think that's a great opportunity today.
Yeah, man. You said so many things again that, man, there's so many tidbits I could take from everything you say. And again, being in the industry for a long time and supporting everything you're saying is like spot on. That's probably why you were the first CIO of the Army. But when I think about it in the conversations and how they've shifted from everything you mentioned it earlier, like commercial off the shelf, to, now you have teams, and I saw it with like even this hackathon this week, you have service members now embracing, open source and, cloud native type of applications. And you see more and more, people within our industry creating solutions based on those. And it's almost like people are kind of coming together. We're still our separate companies, but we're producing, code and everything else to support a community of stuff. And I think that's very important when I think about it. And, just kind of rounding just a little bit what we talked about so far is, in my mindset when I do this, it's like the old days where we used to sell storage, and we would sell storage, or we would talk about it. I would architect it and place, but I would always ask them a lot of times. I'm like, well, this is great that I'm, architecting this for you. What's your security situation? And, with DevOps and DevSecOps became that, shift left where we started bringing it up more. And it's so funny how time just kind of mimics itself. And I feel like we still have to always stay ahead. And it's the same way now.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, start talking about it now.
Yeah.
Make it known.
Yeah.
And then us in the industry can start to make that easier for you to adopt.
Yeah. 100%. And so while we just talked about, the data challenge, the other piece that I think is working in parallel, and you just referred to that, is the modernization that's happening with software architectures, right? So the data architecture is one challenge, software architecture, the application architecture is the next one. And as I noted earlier, with the shift to everything, that's being software defined, means that, one, the software has got to be decoupled from the hardware, right? And then you want that modularity, interoperability, and flexibility to actually run your application anywhere, all the way from the cloud to running it into one of our small, brick devices, right? And containers is probably one of the best ways to do that, right? And so that is the from an application perspective, I think that is a huge culture change, much needed, has to happen, because this is now how you start to manage your distributed workloads. You're able to have flexibility in terms of running different pieces of the application on different platforms, and then syncing them and bringing them together. But again, completely agnostic to the actual hardware itself. The same application, the same piece of code is going to have to run in a multi-cloud environment just as well it runs, on an edge node.
Yes.
And I think that is another huge, tremendous opportunity for you guys in Spectro Cloud, with what you're doing. And we see that transformation happening, a number of programs, including the Army's Next Generation Command and Control. We're seeing that, that is the future. That's how it's going to be. And when you do that, now, operating the software, maintaining the software, centralized control, but then yet decentralized execution and processing is all possible in that new architecture.
Yeah, and it's refreshing to hear that. And I know, and I think it goes back to what you said earlier, is changing that mindset. And there's a lot of people still stuck in like, this is how it's done. Like, this is hard for me to grasp. And again, you kind of nailed it. If we bring it down to that level, containers is that kind of thing. Because when I think about it in what you're referring to, right? In the enterprise civilian world, we think of multi-tenancy.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people don't think about that when we talk about the Fed space, but it is a huge multi-tenant environment. It's not only that, it's multinational. So how do I create applications or environments, better yet, that are supporting not only, a commonality for our warfighters, but what's a good commonality for, our NATO partners, or, like Five Eyes, for example, or something like that, where it's like, we need to build these for test environments. And yes, we're going to still have to train these or do these within a data center. But now, how do I make a repeatable, mutable, hardened? Because there's so many things that come into play in our thing that I could take these applications, go out somewhere, and even touching on the ATO portion of it is, so now I've developed it. How can I make that now faster and easier to take this to any region, any warfighter, and then ATO it as quickly as possible?
That's right.
Yeah. So
and that all gets into, I think, maybe what we're going to spend a couple minutes in talking about is modular open systems architecture, right? And we've heard most recently, just in the last few years now, Department of War re-emphasizing that. And I had, again, in my former role as CIO, was a big proponent for MOSA and SOSA. And in the Army, we have what's called the CMOS standards for C5ISR. Always an interesting conversation to have, with industry, to hear their perspectives on it. For me, as somebody that's been on both sides of the fence, both working in government and in industry, gives me the ability to view it from both perspectives. And I still am a strong believer in MOSA, right? And I honestly do believe that it gives our DOW a competitive advantage. It is not a disadvantage. There's often this misconception that moving towards standardization and open architectures means somehow that you're diluting your architecture, that you're somehow it's suboptimal. But yet when you look at how we fight our threat environments and how we need to adapt and be flexible, to meet those threat environments, absolutely the only way we can do that is through MOSA principles, right? And for example, we just talked about leveraging containers and when you build it using Kubernetes standards and and other standards that gives you interoperability, not just within our joint force but with our allies and partners. To me, that is no better way to achieve interoperability than trying to do it, leveraging these ways. Now that's different from talking about data standards, right? So for a long time, I think the DOW has talked about, using NATO standards and STANAGs and all that stuff. And I think that era, while, will continue to be important, I think where we're seeing with technology and how that's moving, there's different ways to achieve interoperability today through open architectures, where some of the emphasis in the past around data standards, um, is no longer that important anymore. For example, if you're able to, turn every data that needs to be shared and exchanged, and you're able to do that using APIs or leveraging microservices architecture, it how the data itself is structured as a standard is much less relevant, right? If you're able to actually move that data, and you can do that using APIs or microservices. So really, it's a great time to be where we're seeing the software modernization, and MOSA principles come together in a truly unique way that's innovative and is the right thing to do, for us in the DOW.
That's perfect. And I know we keep going on, and I could probably always piggyback on exactly, the feedback you're giving right now. But I think, as you know, because we're probably getting close to time and everything else, and I would love to spend even more and more and more. So I think the last thing is, and I think this kind of shows it right here, us sitting together, you know, one completely different what I went in the military in the 90s it did as an infantry guy, but we're both sitting here now in the industry supporting this. Two different companies, two different type of, when we think about it, the hardware data set side and supplying this hardware at the edge, in along with the, I would say that open software that you have within Brick AI, and then working with someone like Spectro Cloud and others in the industry. What I'm bringing this back to is, I think that's where everybody needs to understand is we win. Just like when I was in the Army as an infantry guy, we won better as a team. And to be able to support, the war fighters and the nations and everything else, we need to come together, build something that is built off of that MOSA principle, and let's build that interoperability that, designed for disconnected first, that open, support for legacy, and big, especially on your guys' side, you don't have one. There's no, like you said earlier, there's not one size fits all. You create something or a product that can be used modular and grow as you need, or hey, let's go big now if you need to.
And this gets into, how we're seeing industry respond to this, right? So, on it used to be that in the past we had large system integrators essentially, control the architecture. They would come up with it, they would own it, they would bring a bunch of, subcontractors to work under them and comply with the architecture, right? And at the end of the day, you still got something that was very much vertically integrated, very much, even though I won't use the word proprietary, I would still say something that was just not very flexible enough for us to, make any changes to that architecture. I think what we're seeing the shift now is exactly what we're doing, right? I didn't know you guys, and you didn't know us guys. But then, when we looked at how we were architecting our products for this based on MOSA principles and modularity, it makes it easier for us to team and partner, right? So we're creating this coalition of the willing to say, it's like, hey, there are unique ways in which we can now work together and integrate because we follow the same common principles. And at the end of the day, we only have one objective in mind, right? We're just making sure that our joint force is successful every single day, right? That is our only objective. And if we put that objective and make that as our number one priority, right? How everything else that we do behind the scenes in terms of how we work together, how we integrate our products, all that becomes easier because we follow the same, foundational principles from a technical perspective, and we have the same ethos when it comes to what matters to us. And for us, making sure the joint warfighter is successful is what matters to us, right? So between those two principles, I think this is now enabling a whole new set of partners to come together, to work together in some unique ways without the government or one large system integrator telling you what to do and how to do it. I think this is how we get to some tremendous innovation, right? And we're starting to see that, and it's exciting to see how industries react to this.
Yeah, that's perfect. And I mean, I think that's probably a great roundup right there. And I couldn't be happier to work with folks like you. I mean, I'm learning a lot, which I love, by the way. And if I ever had to leave a tidbit for anybody, is as we make this, you can't just be blinded and stay in your lane. Get out of your lane. Talk to a lot of the ones out there that have either accomplished it, been a part of it, or have had to live this from day to day, from the operators to the ones at the top that have to make those decisions.
Yeah.
And I think you nailed it, keeping that ethos within the industry and how we act and how we bring things to market, I think is big.
Yeah, and I mean, I think so. Some challenge back to both industry and government, right? One is reimagine the edge. It is not, the edge is not what it used to be 5 years ago or even 2 years ago.
Yeah.
It is evolving, it's changing, and it offers a tremendous opportunity to really do things in a different way. Two, is your architecture truly modular? Is it truly open, where you're able to make these rapid adjustments, as you respond to the threat environment? Because carrying a bunch of gear that was built 5 years ago for a different threat environment today, which is inflexible for today, is not going to make us more powerful. So that's two. Third is, as much as, I was responsible for the Army's cloud strategy and implementation of the cloud, and we pushed for being cloud first. Today the game is the cloud is a nice to have, right?
Yeah.
You cannot count on having cloud at the edge, and you cannot count on your operations relying on consistent connectivity back to the cloud or to any fixed data center for that matter, right? And if your architecture involves that, the first thing you got to do is cut all those pieces out, okay? Throw them out of your architecture, look at what's left and say, okay, if this is what my squad, my company, my unit has to go out and has to survive and be lethal, is that good enough? And if it's not good enough, I'm sorry, your architecture is broke, right?
Yeah.
And that's important. And fourth is, you got to continue to work in this kind of mixed mode of working with some legacy systems, because they're going to be around for a while. That it's not going away. But for you to work in a mixed mode environment where you have legacy and you're modernizing new applications at the same time means that, you're still going to have to look at, decoupling these things, right? If you're, what's the best way to take a legacy application and then, ensure that it's integrating and working with the hardware that you have. And that's that's going to be something that continues to happen, because there's no rip and replace approach, right? There's not, it's impossible for what we're doing in the DOW today to just say, it's like, hey, let's just throw all this stuff out and we're going to get brand new stuff, and starting January 1st of next year, everybody's going to have something brand new. It doesn't happen, right? So that's the reality of the edge, right? So, it amazed me that every time I would, go out and meet with our units in my former role, discussions that we would talk about, things that we would talk about and strategize and plan at the Pentagon, and the realities of the edge and what the soldier would have and the gear that they would have to fight with every single day, that disconnect was so huge that it was mind-boggling to me, right?
Yeah.
Here we are talking about all of these great things, pie in the sky, and yet the reality on the ground was different. And we have to converge that, and we got to get those in the hands of every single soldier, as quickly as possible. And for industry to come together to make this happen, and I think is truly exciting times to be.
Yeah, I mean, you could have said, and it's funny because I'm so glad you kind of jumped in it, because that was going to be my last thought is, you know, what, especially within your former role, I was going to ask you, I was like, what can we do better? And, I see that, I just got to say something about it, is there's always a huge disconnect when, you need the people up there having the big ideas and go, this is what I would love to accomplish, and that pie in the sky, and like, and just to be able to get anywhere. But then you've got to be able to take it down to someone and go, hey, psst, is this possible? No, there's no way we can do that. If we do that, that's going to be 2 years from now.
Yeah.
Okay, what can I remove or do to get as close as possible to reality for you. And I think that's, for me, when I think about what we could always do better, is just that. Not build it to, oh, I got it. This is what we're going to build.
Yeah.
No, like, go ask someone. Say, hey, what is actually needed?
Yeah.
And I'm not gonna lie, that's what really drew, when I met you and you went in your product, I was like, oh, that was seriously built for
the edge.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I was like that. And I'm like, and it's not like lock you in. It's hey, I'm giving you something that, depending on what your mission set is, it will accommodate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And listen, I mean, so for years we've seen everybody hype the word edge, right? Now everybody wants to hype the word edge AI.
Oh, yeah.
And so, I think for us as a company, we've stayed focused on true to the principles of, okay, when you talk about the edge, the definition of the edge is, one, it's moving, right? And it could be, a striker that's moving. It could be, a fixed wing aircraft. It could be a rotary wing. It could be a submarine. But it's something that's on the move, right? Where you're always going to be challenged with power constraints. You're never going to have enough power to run everything you need. Mm-hmm. It's going to have to be in an environment that's harsh, right? So, moisture, humidity, high temperatures, low temperatures. It's going to have to operate in that environment. It's going to have to operate, with no networks, right? With no networks, not a DDIL environment, literally no networks. Mm-hmm. And so to us, that is the definition. So when we build our brick products, we looked at that as our essentially what we call the SWaP-C envelope, right? Yeah. The SWaP-C envelope, size, weight, and power cost, is that envelope. And how do we optimize that for the edge without trading off performance? Because again, that is the biggest challenge in the industry. Yes, you can get all of that. But at the end of the day now, if you're going to have something that's much less processing power, much less storage, well, that's not good enough, right? You want the best of both. And so we've been fortunate, to come up with the right technology, the IP around saying like, okay, how do we maximize throughput? How do we run AI workloads in these harsh environments with the right form factors, and yet to be able to do that with minimal power, requirements? Because again, the days of lugging around, massive amounts of fuel with you and generators, is going to be long gone. Because again, if you have to be really expeditionary, you want to really be on the move. If you can minimize the, your footprint of not just, the power and logistics that goes behind it, but your IT footprint, where you can take something like the brick, throw it into the back of your Humvee, connect it to your onboard power, you continue to operate, when the Humvee shuts down, no problem. You still have battery backup, on the device. It's continuing to run. It's continuing to work. You pick it up, hand carry it, with one hand, take it back, move into another, into a command post, take it out, move it into a striker. You want that level of data migration and modularity, right? And if you can do that in that rugged environment, now you solve the problem. And to me, I remember at the, just over 5 years ago when we were at the Pentagon talking about all these things, to us, that was a holy grail. And I do believe now that we've gotten there.
Wow. Yeah, that's a big change that quickly. And just to add harsh environments, by the way, I was a private before, so that attributes to those harsh environments. Mm-hmm. You've got to build stuff that go in the hands of, I don't want to say like using the word common soldier, but a soldier. Mm-hmm. That, that quick time to value, it's got to be built not only for harsh environments, right, but to be easy to use by a soldier. And being able to throw it. You weren't lying when you said throw it in Humvee. I was like, that's what we do.
That's what we do. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And this is where, where people try to say, it's like, oh, I got a server that I built for a data center, and then I'm going to ruggedize it. Yeah. Right. And then somehow I'm going to be able to take this and, mount it onto my Humvee. Well, we know the reality isn't that, right? No. Those data center servers are built to operate in a different set of conditions. They need clean environments to run. The temperature's got to be controlled. And that's why, all data centers have, massive amounts of power that go into HVAC and cooling, for those servers. So kid yourself not by saying it's like somehow you can ruggedize that and run it, on your Humvee. No, you can't. It requires a completely different design and architectural approach. And then the other point you made about, keeping this simple, KISS, keep it simple and stupid,
Yeah,
right?
yep.
That 100% has to apply here.
Yes.
KISS principles have to apply because at the end of the day, I think our warfighter at the edge, life is complicated enough for them already, and if your new tech and your new gear is just going to add more complexity to them, to me that's a no-go, non-starter, right?
Absolutely.
So in fact, we kid ourselves by saying it's like, the reason why we call our product a brick, because it's got to be as dumb as a brick. Okay, you throw,
I'm going to use that now.
Yeah, I mean, is anybody delicate with a brick? You throw them around, right?
Yeah.
And it's contained. It's it's easy to use. It doesn't need a lot of care and feeding and attention, and it doesn't need a lot of delicate handling. And that's how it needs to be. But while at the same time, it's got to be that it's easy plug and play, where, and if something does need to be repaired on the field, it's got to be something that all you need is a screwdriver, and any private should be able to open it up and say, it's like, okay, I pulled this component out, I put this one in, and I throw it back in my Humvee, and I'm going, right? And you shouldn't have IT technicians. You shouldn't have to have FSRs in the field, to manage these tactical edge devices in the field. It's got to be where, built rugged, but when things do fail, a screwdriver is all you should need. And if that's not what you're building your products for, I'm sorry, that's no, that's not a good way to support the soldier today.
That's it. So you guys are, we have our orders. I mean, that's it right there. I think that's what we need to do. So I appreciate the time today.
Oh, thank you.
I would love to do this multiple times with you, because I think there's a lot more we could talk about. And even though we're at that, kind of crossroads right now where edge is out there, and we're talking about it now, we talk about the tactical edge, I think there's still a lot of education that has to happen. So appreciate the time again today.
Thank you.
And,
really enjoyed the conversation. And for everybody that's listening today, reach out to us to hear more, and to talk about the opportunities that where we can support our warfighter. There's so much we can do together as industry, and we don't need the DOW to tell us what to do. It's up to us to take solutions to them. We're standing by. We have a great partnership here. And we're ready to bring more people onto this coalition. So let's go do this, folks.
Perfect. Well said. Thank you.
Cool.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening, and thank you to our guests, Mark Perry and Dr. Raj Iyer. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to CareCast, and be sure to listen to our other discussions. If you'd like more information on how Spectro Cloud and T2nd can assist your organization, please visit www.caresoft.com or email us at spectrocloud@caresoft.com or t2nd@caresoft.com. Thanks again for listening, and have a great day.